recently we've been doing reviews of all the hero aspect cards, right? So these are all the aspect cards that come in your hero packs, that come in the expansion boxes, and we've just been talking a bit about them, seeing what we like, what we don't like, some options, some ideas with them. And we're now on the fourth cycle, which is the Mad Titan Shadow. So let's dive into the expansion box, and then we'll get into the hero packs. All right, so the first hero we're talking about is Spectrum, which is a hero I never really liked that much. I wanted to like Spectrum, and I think there's still like an option there for her, but I really can't get her to work that great, or as well as I would really would prefer her to. But oh well. So she came in leadership, and she has some really interesting cards. So her card pool is pretty interesting. So first we have a leadership Captain America Steve Rogers edition, 6 ally cost. Or I'm sorry, ally 6 cost, 2 thwart, 2 attack, 4 life, toughness. Reduce the cost by by 1 for each Avenger character you control. So it's pretty interesting because if you build an Avengers type leadership deck, this card makes a lot of sense. You can actually get Steve down to be pretty cheap. You figure if you have something like Triskelion and or Avengers Tower in, and you yourself are an Avenger, you can reduce that cost by 5 essentially and just make Captain cost 1, right? Even if you get down to him costing like 3 or 4, that's really good, especially coming in with toughness to get that free block in. So it's a really strong card as long as you're building kind of like an Avengers type leadership deck. Outside of an Avengers type deck, I don't know if it really makes that much sense. So next up we have Power Man, 3 cost ally, 1 thwart, 0 attack with 2 consequential damage on that attack of 0, 3 life. Power Man enters play with 2 chi counters on him, and then an action is you can discard any number of chi counters from Power Man. He gets +2 for each chi counter discarded this way until the end of the phase. Now we have cards nowadays that let you ready up your ally, which could be super useful in this situation, right? Because it's till the end of the phase, it's not just the next attack. So if you have an attachment on him that gives +1 attack, and then he gets +2, right? So he's swinging 3, and then you can ready him up and have him attack again. It will knock him out, but still it's super useful in the sense that you can now do basically 4 damage bringing him in there. So there is some things that you could do, mess around with that. Or let me rephrase that, I'm sorry. You should remove both chi counters so he gets 4 attack and then a 5th one if you have any modifiers or anything like that. So then he would attack twice and then it'd be 8 or 10 damage. Sorry, I read that wrong really quick. But that's what you should really be doing there with him, so it gets a really good use out of him. You can't use him as a blocker then unless you figure out a way to bolster his health a lot. But other than that, it's still a Power Man still has a place in a lot of decks. I don't know if it's like a fantastic card, but I think it can be pretty strong as long as you kind of have more of that ready up style type of deck. Then it makes a bit more sense then. Next up, we have White Tiger, a 3 cost ally, 2 thwart, 2 attack, 2 life. Now, White Tiger is one of the more interesting ones, and it's important to note that make the call, right, where you get to pay the cost of an ally from your discard pile. This response doesn't work with Make the Call, right? So it works with other heroes, other allies like Nick Fury, but it won't work with White Tiger. But it states after you play White Tiger from your hand, draw X cards to a maximum of 3, where X is equal to the villain's stage number. If this villain has no stage number, draw 1 card. So for villains that are like A-B sided, right? It's not that great because it's only ever going to be 1. But for most villains in the game, if you're playing on expert, White Tiger kind of scales pretty well, right? You're paying 3 for her, especially if you have a double in hand, and you get to draw 3 cards, so it's essentially like getting her out for free. And that 2/2/2 stat line is pretty decent, right? You get to thwart 2 or attack 2, and then use her as a blocker. And I think that's super helpful, or can be super helpful, and can be pretty strong. So she's an ally I tend to put into decks more if I'm playing expert. Standard, it's not bad, but a 1 card draw after playing her, it's probably not as worth it. It's not terrible, but it's not as worth it. There are cheaper options to probably go with. If you're doing something with like an overall stat boost, maybe it's more worth it, or something like that. But generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of playing her on standard, but in my expert games, I tend to use her a bit more. All right, then we have Kalu. It's a 2 cost ally, 1 thwart, 1 attack, 2 life. It's also a mystic. After Kalu enters play, search the top 5 cards of your deck for an event. Add that event to your hand, shuffle your deck. Now, if you're running an event heavy a type of hero in leadership, this works really well, right? It's really nice to be able to kind of go through because of those top 5 cards, right? It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be a specific event. It could be any one of those events. So if you're looking for a very specific event in those top 5 cards, it's kind of nice. It is a way to offset his costs just a little bit, right? Maybe not a ton, but at least it lets you offset it just a little bit, assuming you draw the event card. So it can be good. It can be useful. It's not super amazing. There are cards and other aspects, especially that lets you attach the card to the aspect, or I'm sorry, attach the card to the ally themselves, which is much more interesting because it doesn't mess up your hand size. With this, it's like you have to play him right away, and then you have to be able to play that card right away to make it really worth it, which isn't always happening. But Kalu isn't that bad of an ally to bring out there. Then we have Mighty Avengers, a card I personally like a lot. 3 cost support, max 1 team card per player. If each of your characters has the Avenger trait, each ally you control gets +1/+1 thwart an attack. This is what I was talking about with if you have cards that are out there that can enhance their stats and make them better, like Power Man, for example. This is great if you're doing the Avengers build. A lot of times now when I'm building an Avenger type deck, this card is almost a guarantee, right? There's very, very few times I would not put this card in there. I think it's super strong. If you team it up with a ready up type of style or ready up type of play, I think it can be good because a lot of times, I don't know about everyone else, but I have the terrible tendency of a 3 life ally to use them once and then unfortunately have to use them as a blocker. So I miss out on 1 round or 1 attack worth of things. If you're doing kind of a ready up style with this card, it makes it a lot more efficient and a lot better. But I like this card a lot. I think this card is really, really strong and definitely worth checking out. All right, Mass Attack is a 3 cost event. You exhaust 3 allies you control that share the same trait. So it can be anything that's along with your hero, right? So same trait as your hero. So you're building an Avengers deck or a Guardians deck, what it doesn't matter. Deal X damage to an enemy where X is the total attack of all the allies and the hero. So this is a way of beefing up certain allies and then not having them take consequential damage, right? Or just in general, not having your allies take consequential damage if the hero can kind of like absorb it a bit. So this isn't a bad option. I kind of do like this card. I just don't use it as much as I should, right? Realistically, I don't, because a lot of times my allies are being used as cheap ways of blocking. Now, if you have like a Nick Fury or Professor X or somebody who's going to disappear that round anyway, it's not so bad. But it's one of those things where it's not a bad card, and if you have ways to ready everyone up, it can be good because they won't take consequential damage, so you can ready them up and then attack and then use them as a block, right? There's different ways to play with this card. I just haven't found a way to make it super efficient or super useful. I hope to one day. It seems like I have to line up just a little too much, and you have to make sure your board state's really big, or at least, built out with the 3 allies and whatnot. Like, there's just a lot there with things to do. It can be a little tricky. It's not a bad card, but I feel like you really have to build with this card in mind. And unfortunately for me, and maybe a lot of other people, when you build out your hero or you build out your board, right, you're using your allies a lot as blockers, unfortunately. All right, we have another event with Moxie. After you change form, your hero gets +1/+1/+1 until the end of the round. It's not a bad idea, right? For flipping type hero, this isn't bad. Or if you have someone like Wasp or Ant-Man, where they're going from like big form to little form, right? Like that's not so bad. I just don't find a ton of use for this card. If you have, again, a changing form and a way to ready up, this makes a lot more sense. But I feel like now I'm aligning a lot of things when now I'm burning a card to maybe get 2 extra attack in, or 2 extra damage, I'm sorry, if I was able to ready up my hero. And would that resource be better used for something else, right? So like it's not a bad card by any means. It's just I feel like I can't get it to efficiently work the best way possible. And there must be some other build out there that does this better. I haven't figured out Moxie great. I know some people like Moxie and have used Moxie efficiently. I'm just not one of them. I haven't done it yet. All right, Band Together is one of our newer resources that we see. This card generates a wild resource for each ally you control to a maximum of 3. Again, if you're building kind of an ally-heavy deck with the board state being mostly allies, that could be pretty good, pretty useful. I use this now and again. Even at 2, it's good, right? Even at 2, it can be good because you figure that's like a double resource or an extra double resource. That's not too bad, especially as a wild resource. This card or this deck also came with Blade, who I personally love. 1 cost ally, 1 thwart, 2 attack, no consequential damage on either, which we'll get into in a second, 3 life. So after Blade thwarts or attacks, choose to either spend a fist resource from your hand or discard Blade. So You are paying an extra resource, but it can be worth it, especially if you stack Blade with an extra attack or an extra thwart, like some attachments from leadership. He gets to be really strong and starts swinging like really well. I mean, he starts doing some really crazy stuff if you really want him to. So he can be super useful in that regard. Even if you just use the 2 attack and he discards himself, that's fine. I sometimes put him out there just as a cheap block, right? Because the next round I know I need a blocker, so I put out for 1 cost, right? Put a blocker out there. That's not terrible either. So he definitely has his place. I think he's actually a pretty strong ally, but he comes and goes in my decks, to be completely honest. Like there's sometimes I use him a lot, and there's sometimes I use him not as much. So you kind of have to decide what you want to do. So speaking of Avengers Tower, which I mentioned earlier, 2 cost support. If each of your allies has the Avenger trait, increase your ally limit by 1, which is great. Exhaust this tower to reduce the cost of the next Avenger ally. Play this phase by 1, which is super useful. Again, you're only really doing this in an Avengers type leadership build, or really just, it doesn't have to be a leadership, but it could be any Avengers type build. If you're doing Injustice or whatever, it makes sense. But you have to be kind of geared toward that, right? Toward a more ally heavy deck for this to make sense. Avengers Mansion, we've already covered. Ready to Rumble. 1 cost upgrade, max 1 per player under your player's control. After you change form, discard this card, ready your hero. I like the idea, right? So I think it's interesting for like a Wasp or whomever that has different forms where you can change from one hero side to another hero side. Then you can use this, so you can essentially like attack or thwart twice or whatever. I think it's interesting for that. I get the idea of what it's trying to do, where you recover in your alter ego, you flip up to hero, and then you can get rid of this to ready yourself up. It's not bad, right? It's just not a card I tend to prioritize, and maybe I should. But even as a solo player, where I have to flip down to do certain things, like I'm just not prioritizing this card. I'd rather prioritize cards that let me heal up in combat, right? The protection has some of these cards. Almost all aspects now have some of these cards. So it's not as worth it to me to use this card. Now there are certain things like your obligation that usually exhaust you in your alter ego. So this could be more useful for that too. If you're dealing with obligations that are really ruining you, this is also an option, right? Because you'd be able to go from your alter ego side, flip up to your hero side, and then ready up your hero like nothing kind of happened. So there is an option with that, but it's not a card I use a ton or anything like that. All right, so now moving on from Spectrum to Adam Warlock. He's got quite the kit. It's pretty interesting because of the way that he works. There's going to be a lot of different cards in this kit and some interesting different things they tried with him, which I don't think anyone uses. But first off is Marvel Boy. 2 cost allies, 0 thwart, 2 attack, 2 life. When Marvel Boy attacks, spend the fist resource. This attack gains piercing and range. This can be good. I've rarely used it though. Like there's sometimes with aggression that you need extra piercing, and this is an option that's there, especially if you have a resource generator that's a wild resource generator or fist resource, that's fine. To get piercing range can be good, but he's still taking consequential damage, so he's going to get knocked out eventually, which is not, I guess, as good. So Marvel Boy, I think, has a very niche position, right? And it's fine, but I don't love it. I don't think it's anything amazing. Speaking about not amazing, we have In-Betweener. It's a 2 cost event. So the way this card works is that you shuffle this card into the encounter deck without looking. And then when revealed, deal 2 damage to the villain and remove this card from the game. This effect cannot be canceled. So this is such a weird card because you're essentially drawing this card at some point. You're paying 2 costs to shuffle this in the encounter deck to eventually hopefully reveal it, right? And not as a boost icon. So revealing this card, and you get to deal 2 damage to the villain, which is like a 2 for 2 thing. Okay, like I guess you don't get a bad card that round too, so there's an extra benefit in that. But there's a lot of things that have to line up just right, and I tried like 2 or 3 times to make this work, and it seemed silly to me. It just seemed like it wasn't an efficient use of any of my cards or any of my time or anything like that. So I wasn't a big fan of this card. If anyone has ever figured out how to make this work, please let me know. I'm really interested. I would like to, because it's still in like pristine condition because the sleeve hasn't barely been touched, but let me know. This would be cool to get this to work. All right, so Magic Attack is a 1 cost event. You can only play if you're a Mystic. Choose an enemy and discard up to 5 cards from the top of your deck. Deal 1 damage to the enemy for each card discarded this way. So it can be a 1 for 5, which isn't bad, right? It's not terrible. You are kind of burning through your deck a little bit. So it's not something I would do constantly and try to recur this card or anything like that. But 1 for 5 is a pretty strong attack, and I think it definitely has a place in some Mystic decks if you're trying to be a bit more aggressive. So not a bad card, but not like amazing or anything like that. All right, Uppercut, I'm pretty sure we've seen in the past. 3-cost event, 5 damage. It's fine. Combat Training, I'm pretty sure we've seen 2-cost upgrade. Your hero gets +1 attack. That's fine if you're attack heavy. Here's another resource card that's new. I believe this is new. So after you spend this card, you deal 1 damage to the villain. This is one of those cards I didn't understand why I would really do this, because you're just kind of adding a damage on, and it's not terrible, right? Like if you have a strong event, it's not terrible. It has its place, and it's fine. I guess that's what I should say. It's fine. I used to never use it, and now I slowly use it a bit more. I don't think it's an amazing card, but to be able to, as a response, deal 1 damage to the villain. If you're using this card with a attack event to attack a minion, and then you're pinging the tough off a villain, right? Like there's places where this card makes sense, but it's not like an amazing card or anything like that. Quasar is a 3-cost ally, Justice. 1 thwart, 2 attack, 3 life. After Quasar enters play, remove 1 threat from each scheme in play. This is like a Venom Goblin great card, right? Or can be a great card. Like there's some things that you could do with this card that makes it kind of fun. If there's a lot of side schemes out there, and now that we're getting hero schemes, right? Or hero side schemes, whatever they're called. Now that we're getting them, like Quasar will help with that as well. Like there's some interesting things you can do with Quasar. So it's not a terrible card. You just have to make sure it's done with like at least 1 or 2 like side schemes out there. Then I think its value is worth a lot more. And its stat line isn't bad for what it is. All right, Living Tribunal. This is like the aggression version with In-Betweener. 2-cost event, shuffle this in. Remove 2 threat from the main scheme. Remove this card from the game. The event can be canceled. Okay, like again, let me know if you've gotten this to work, because I really haven't. For Justice, I want to say we've covered this card, but just in case, 2-cost event, removes 3 threat from a scheme. 4, instead of you pay for a science resource, you should be generally using science resources in Justice decks, because that is the resource generator card. Good card, solid way. I mean, removing 4 threat from a scheme in solo is huge. Like that's a lot of threat removal. So for solo, this can be a really strong card if you're building the type out where you're not constantly keeping the main scheme in check, where you're letting it go up a little bit and then trying to take it down a lot. Zone of Silence, play if only you're a Mystic, 1-cost event. Choose a scheme and discard up to 4 cards from the top of your deck. Remove 1 threat. Again, the 1 for 4 threat removal isn't bad, but you are thinning out your deck a bit faster. If you're like me and you play closer to 50 card decks, this isn't terrible, same as the other one. It's not great, but it's not a terrible card. Heroic Intuition, I'm pretty sure we've covered this too. It's 2-cost upgrade. You get +1 thwart. That's fine. It's a good card. Determination is a resource generator. After you spend this card, remove 1 threat from the main scheme. I wish it wasn't the main scheme. I wish it was just any scheme. Now, what's interesting is this isn't a thwarting card, right? So there's things that, what is it? Patrol, I think it is, or guard. I think it's patrol. Patrol or guard, one of the two. That doesn't allow you to remove threat or like confusion or whatever. Like this would still let you do it because it's not a thwarting action, right? So Crisis Icon though would still stop you, right? The exclamation point. I think that's the Crisis Icon. I'm sure I'm getting messed up. But the exclamation point would stop you from doing it because you can't remove any threat from the scheme. But if there's anything that would normally stop you from thwarting, like this card will get around it. I just wish it was any scheme, not the main scheme, but it's not the worst thing in the world. All right, Major Victory is a 2-cost ally in leadership, 1/1/2 stat line. When Major Victory is defeated, choose a friendly Guardian character, ready that character. I've thrown him in some Guardian decks. Not the worst thing in the world, right? It's not terrible to get him going. The problem is you don't really use him as a blocker, or generally I won't, unless the Guardian character defended, and then he's defending a secondary attack that readies up your hero. That's the only way I've really gotten that to work on that side of things. But in general, I won't use Major Victory as a blocker. He'll be used 2 rounds in a row, and then use him to ready up my hero that second round. Or you could do it with another character if you want. But generally, I've picked my hero for the most part. But I guess you could do some interesting builds with like around Voltron builds to like help ready them up. Could be an option. All right, Eternity. I don't think I've ever used this card. 2-cost event, shuffle in. When revealed, draw 1 card and remove this card from the game. Again, you're paying 2 to draw a card. Doesn't seem worth it. Let me know if you disagree. Summoning Spell, which actually is a pretty darn good card. 2-cost event. Can only be a Mystic to play it. Discard cards from the top of your deck until you discard an ally. Put the ally into play. If you're running like an expensive ally heavy deck, or if you recurred or shuffled back in allies, you know what's coming up, this can be worth it, right? This can be really, really worth it, especially if that card is Nick Fury or something. There's a bunch of ways to make this worth it, but in general, as long as your allies are slightly more expensive, it's nice to be able to, and you have an ally heavy deck where you're not discarding all your cards. It's nice to be able to just get them in for like a slightly cheaper price. I do like this card. I think it's pretty decent. Make the Call, we've definitely talked about before. Strong, solid card, ends up in most of my leadership decks. Inspired, I'm pretty sure we've talked about. 1-cost upgrade, max 1 per ally, gets a +1/+1 stat line. Can be helpful if you're doing more of that Voltron type build. Innovation, after you spend this card, heal 1 damage from the ally you control. I barely use this card because generally I don't worry about healing too many allies. Now, again, if I'm doing a Voltron type build where I'm really making one ally super, super strong, this card makes a little bit more sense, right? It makes them a little bit better, a little bit stronger. But I don't think it's like a must-have card. I don't think it's like a must-include card. I think it's a good card, but I don't think it's like amazing. All right, next up is Charlie 27. 4-cost ally, 1/1/4 stat line. Retaliate 1 and comes in with tough. In protection. I want to like this card more. I think he could be cool. I just don't think he's great, right? Generally speaking, you're trying to use him as a blocker a lot and just let him retaliate people. But I don't know. Four cost is really expensive. Excuse me, really expensive for that. Coming in with tough helps a little bit, so at least you get like 2 retaliates in. But 4 for 2 rounds of blocking and 2 retaliate damage, like maybe that's kind of worth it. But it's not like an overwhelming value in my mind. It's fine for what it is, but it's not super strong. The Gardener, let's talk about another card I've never really used. 2-cost event. So I've never really used this, but people have made the argument that this card is better because you can heal 2 damage from your identity and remove this card from the game. So 2 cost, 2 heal. It's not, again, I don't think it's great, but I do see the most value out of this, right? Being able to heal on the villain's turn is actually kind of decent, right? It's kind of helpful. And it's not just your hero or alter ego side, right? It's your identity, which is also helpful. Out of all the cards, this might be the most useful one. But even then, like, again, you can't get it as a boost card. You have to get it like when it's actually revealed. Like, I don't think it's super great. But again, let me know out of those 4 cards, I think we've covered all 4 now. Which one do you like the most, the least? Am I missing something that you can do with those cards? Be kind of interested in hearing that. All right, spell or shield spell, 0-cost event. When you would take any amount of damage from an attack, discard that many cards from the top of your deck. Prevent all of this damage. Things like Ronin, can actually be a really good card. Now, it's going to thin out your deck really fast, but if the difference is thinning out your deck and not surviving, obviously you're probably going to choose thinning out your deck. So there's definitely some value to this card. I do like this card a fair amount. Counterpunch is pretty good. I'm not sure if we covered this yet. It's a 0-cost event. After your hero defends against an attack, deal damage to the enemy equal to your attack. I think we did. I think this was in the Drax deck, and it makes a lot of sense for Drax. So it's pretty good for him. Armor Vest, we've done 1-cost upgrade to give you +1 defense. Sure, it's good. Preservation, after you spend this card, heal 1 damage from your hero. It's not bad, right? I've used it a couple times. There's a place for it. It stinks, again, that it's hero side and not alter ego, but that's okay. So I think it has some value to it because, again, being able to heal while you're attacking on your hero side is good. But it's not like overly strong or anything like that, but it's fine. It's fine for what it is. And a Martin X, 3-cost ally, 1/1/4. Reduce the cost to play Martin X if you're a Guardian. If you're a Guardian, this makes a lot of sense. It's a 2/1/1/4, which makes Martin X pretty good. So I recommend him for that. And he ends up in my deck for most Guardians. But I don't use him much like past that. All right, next up we have Nebula. And Nebula came in Justice, has some pretty interesting cards. So Arrows is a 2-cost ally, 2/1/2 stat line. After you play Arrows from your hand, confuse a minion for each science resource you use to pay him, which is kind of nice, actually, that it's not in addition to, right? If you're naturally going to use science resources to pay for him, it makes it actually pretty strong and pretty good that you can confuse up to basically 2 minions in the play, which is really useful. Arrows finds a place in my deck most of the time, and to get 2 threat removal off of a 2-cost ally, like, and then a block, yes, I pay for that most of the time. I generally like arrows a lot. Wraith is another interesting one. 3-cost ally, 1/3/3 stat line. But when a boost card is turned face up, exhaust Wraith and deal 1 damage to him to cancel that card's boost effect. Which is pretty interesting because there are a lot of bad boost icons out there that can do some crazy stuff. And this just cancels it out, which could be really useful. There definitely is value in that. And I've seen people that know that, okay, if a villain is playing a deck that, again, has a lot of bad boost icons, you can just cancel it out for 1 damage. That's not bad at all. So Wraith definitely has a place and has some really good uses. Venom, Flash Thompson version, 4-cost ally, 2/3/4 stat line, but takes 2 consequential damage for each one. While there is no threat in the main scheme, reduce all consequential damage Venom takes by 1. For solo, this card makes a lot of sense. For multiplayer, this card doesn't make any sense. Generally speaking, in multiplayer, your main scheme being down at 0 isn't going to happen a lot, right? Realistically, it's not going to happen a lot. On multiplayer, depending on how you build your Justice deck, if you're not doing like high thwart amounts, but you're trying to keep it always down at 0, so you're trying to do like kind of that type of build, this card makes a lot of sense. It can be really strong, really good. A 4/2/3/4 stat line is huge, right? Like absolutely huge. And especially if they're only taking 1 consequential damage. Then if you use a first aid to like heal up Venom, Venom can be very, very, very strong if you build kind of around him a bit. Definitely a strong card, but solo, it makes a lot of sense. Multiplayer makes a lot less sense. Justice Serve is a 1-cost upgrade. Play under any player's control. After you thwart and remove the last threat from a scheme, discard Justice Serve to ready your hero. It's kind of a cool idea. Again, it makes more sense in solo, I think. It's not bad for multiplayer, but solo, it makes a lot of sense, especially if you're dealing with side schemes or you have cards that bring in side schemes and you attach this to it because you know you're going to get rid of that side scheme soon. There's some value there, right? There's some interesting value there. It pairs up well. I think it has a place. I don't use it a ton, but it's definitely an interesting card if you're using also type of hero that needs to be readied up to have maximum effect. All right, so we were just talking a bit about, finding side schemes and getting them into play. This is the way you would do it, one way or the other, right? So you search the encounter deck for a side scheme, reveal that side scheme, draw 3 cards, max 1 per round. This is actually a pretty strong card, a 0-cost event. This is one that gets used a lot nowadays because it is a way to easily draw 3 cards. Most of the time, if you're running Justice, you're able to clear out a side scheme pretty quickly. Not all the time, but a lot of times you are. So being able to, again, search the entire deck for the specific side scheme that you want to get is really useful as well. The reason being is because I can choose, okay, I want to deal with this side scheme now, and it could be one where, because in my hand, I know I have a ton of thwarting ability, or I choose one that has very little, so I can easily clear it out, so I'm just getting easy card draw. Right, so there's a few options in the way that you could play this, but generally speaking, super strong card. Then we also have Determination. We've already seen this card, removing 1 threat from the main scheme. The Power of Justice, we've seen before. Brains over Brawn. So 2-cost event. After your hero makes a basic thwart, deal damage to an enemy equal to your hero's thwart. If you have a high damage thwarting hero, or I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. A high thwarting hero, this makes a little more sense, right? So there's, let's say you're playing Phoenix nowadays, where she has 3 thwart. You have a Heroic Justice that puts on 4. You thwart 4, you pay 2 to do 4 damage. That's a pretty good trade-off, right? That can be a really good trade-off. I don't think it's like this amazing card, but there are uses for it if you're building a very thwart-heavy hero, right? Then they get pretty strong. I think we'll see more heroes out there that have 3 base thwart, or the option to get 3 base thwart and then throw a Heroic Justice to push up to 4. I think we'll see more of that, and for that type of thing, this makes a lot of sense. I've seen people argue that 2 for 3 damage is pretty good too, because you're thwarting 3 and then doing 3 damage. I think that makes a lot of sense. And for solo, it makes a lot of sense. For multiplayer, maybe makes a little less sense, but it's definitely a decent card. Heroic Intuition, 2-cost upgrade. We talked about this before, adding +1 thwart, which is fine. Then Cosmos, a 2-cost ally, 1/1/2 stat line. I'm pretty sure we've talked about Cosmo already, because this is the whole you can name the card and not take consequential damage. It's fine. People have built decks around this with Doctor Strange and whatnot. There's ways to exploit this and make it work really well. It's fine. I don't use it a ton, but it's a fine card. Nowhere, I don't think we've covered yet. The 2-cost support. You can only play if you're a Guardian, increase your ally limit by 1. So again, if you're doing like a Guardian ally build, this is really strong. And after you play a Guardian ally, exhaust nowhere, that player draws 1 card. Card draw is huge. Card draw is king generally in this game. This is a really strong card. If you're building an ally guardian heavy deck, this card makes a lot of sense. Highly recommend. All right, then we have Gamora and Nebula's team up card, which, fun fact, this is the only team up card that does not feature both of them because, as you can see, there is no Gamora. We have Thanos, but we have no Gamora. Who knows why? Anyway, it's a 1-cost event. You get to draw 3 cards. Pretty decent card. Paying 1 to draw 3 is useful in a multiplayer game. In solo, it's a little tougher to pull off, but it is one of those ones I will try to now and again, but it's not like a great card overall. But for a team-up card, it's fine. First aid we've talked about, 1-cost event, heal 2 from any character, can be a really useful card overall. Then you get your doubles. All right, so the other aspect cards that were in the box is Energy Spear, a 1-cost upgrade attached to a Guardian ally, max 1 per ally. They get +2 attack and gain piercing. It's actually a really strong card, right? If you're building a Guardian heavy type deck in aggression, this is really strong. In multiplayer, it's really good because generally speaking, your leadership person is going to be building out like the ally deck. And then you could throw this onto one of their allies and make them super strong with piercing. It's kind of actually crazy good. If you're doing kind of a guardian type build. Not everyone does, but whatever. But it is definitely a good card to have. Guardians of the Galaxy, a 2-cost support. It's a team card. You can only play it only one of them under you. If each of your guardians has the guardian trait, this card gains a response. After you play an upgrade on an ally, draw 1 card. It's okay, right? If you get it out early on, it's not bad. If you're doing kind of a Voltron build, like it's not bad. Or if you're cycling through and like building out your allies constantly, it's not bad. I've rarely used this card, to be honest, like really rarely. I think it makes more sense, again, if everybody is throwing upgrades onto one ally, maybe it makes more sense, but still like after you play it under your control. So I don't know. It's a weird card. I still can't get it to fully work. Maybe it's fine, but just not for me. It's not been great. All right, defensive training, 1-cost support, max 2 per deck and uses 2 training counters. Exhaust this card, remove 1 training counter, choose a protection event in your discard pile, shuffle back in your deck. Any way to recall cards from your discard that you use that were really strong to put it back in your deck can be super useful. I like the card. I think it's pretty solid. Honorary Guardian, pretty generic card, 0-cost upgrade. Play if only of the identity trait. You can attach it to a friendly character. They gain the Guardian trait and they get 1 hit point. I've seen people use this to just get the 1 hit point, which maybe is worth it. But it's fine, right? It's a fine card. I don't use that a ton. I've seen people make some interesting builds with it, so there are some cool things you can do with it, but that doesn't mean like it's a great overpowered card or anything. It's fine for what it is. And then another Daughters of Thanos card is in there. All right, next up we have a War Machine, which is someone I don't play enough. Comes in leadership, has some interesting cards though. So Black Panther, 4-cost ally, 2 thwart, 2 attack, 4 life. You may play the event attached to Black Panther as if it were in your hand. We mentioned this earlier in the video. There were cards that let you get cards attached to your allies. This is an example of one. So after Black Panther enters play, choose a leadership event in your discard pile, attach it to him face down. Really strong, right? If you're using Make the Call a lot or something like that, or Strength in Numbers, this could be a really strong way of getting that card back into your hand, essentially, because it's face down, but it doesn't take up a spot. So if you're saving it up a little bit to use Make the Call, super strong, super useful. I like Black Panther a lot. I think he's a really strong ally. Captain Marvel is 5-cost ally, 2 thwart, 3 attack with 2 consequential damage on that attack, 4 life. After Captain Marvel enters play, discard the top 4 cards of your deck. If you discard a printed energy resource, deal 3 damage to an enemy. If you discard more than 1, also stun the enemy. It's not bad, right? It's not bad. It's not a forced response, which is kind of nice. So if you don't want to discard, you don't have to. If you're building a lot of energy heavy deck and the villain can be stunned, it's super useful. As more things get stalwart and steady, it slowly becomes less useful, and the 2 consequential damage really hurts. But there is some value there for sure. If you can stun on the 5-cost and be able to swing for 3 or beef up Captain Marvel and heal her up and add extra life and all that fun stuff, like definitely some value there. But it's not like an overpower card, in my opinion. Falcon. I think we've seen Falcon at this point. I'm not sure because I think there's 2 of them. But anyway, 4-cost ally, 2 thwart, 2 attack, 3 life. After Falcon enters play, look at the top 3 cards in the encounter deck. For each treachery this way, remove 1 threat from a scheme. There are treachery heavy encounter decks out there, so this makes a lot of sense. You can essentially remove 3 threat, right? From a scheme, not the main one, just any scheme. can be super useful, and then he could thwart extra 2 or 2 attack. That's best case scenario. But if you get that to work, it can be good. It can be pretty strong. Goliath is always an interesting card. 4 cost ally, 2 thwart, 1 attack with 2 consequential damage, and 4 life. So Goliath gets +4 attack until the end of the phase. At the end of the phase, discard Goliath max once per phase. So what's interesting is that you can, if you do a ready up type build with Goliath, I mean, he's swinging for 5. And if you can ready up with him once, then he swings for 10 total for 4 costs is really strong. You can't use him as a blocker because at the end of the phase, not the round, you would discard him. So even if you gave him more life, it wouldn't make a difference because of when it is. So that's a little weak and a little sad, but still being able to get 10 damage out there, super useful, assuming you can ready him up. 4 for 5 is not as useful, but if you can ready him up, super strong, super worth it. And then that doesn't even include like adding on attachments or anything to him. Command team, talking about ready up. 2 cost support, has 3 command counters. Exhaust command team, remove 1 command counter from it. Ready an ally. Again, if you're doing kind of a ready up build, very strong, very useful. Sneak attack, not as good as the Lord of the Rings version. 1 cost event. Choose an ally in your hand that shares the same trait as your identity. Put the ally into play. If the ally is still in play at the end of the phase, discard it. The Lord of the Rings version was until the end of the round, which was fantastic because sneak attack Gandalf was super strong. But it's not super great, but it's not terrible, right? There are ways that I've seen people do this with Nick Fury to be able to put him in real cheap and draw a lot of cards or whatever else. There is some uses to sneak attack, but it's definitely not as good as some other cards out there at this point. All right, save the day, 1 cost event. Discard an ally you control. Remove threat from a scheme equal to the ally's printed cost. I don't know. Like, I've seen people do this with Captain America, where it has 6 cost, and like it's not a bad idea. I think you can make it worth it, but it's not something I love. I'd rather, generally speaking, be able to use that ally as a blocker, not necessarily to remove threat off of a scheme. I don't know. That's generally how I see it. Let me know if you disagree. Be kind of interested. Save the day, I've never really made work a ton. Now, going down swinging is kind of the same exact idea. At the 0 cost event, you discard an ally, deal damage to the enemy equal to an ally's printed cost. This is a little bit different because I would use this for like a big push at the end, right? Captain America swings for 2, and then we could throw him away to do 6 more damage. 8 damage total in 1 round. That's kind of huge. So go down swinging, I use a bit more than save the day, but let me know how you use them. All right, next up, make the call. We've talked about that before. Then innovation, heal 1 damage. We've talked about this card, which is pretty decent. Mockingbird, we've talked about in the past. Pretty strong card. Queen Carrier, I'm pretty sure we've talked about. I think that was in the Wasp deck. Good resource generator. 2 Against the World, 3 cost event. Team up card between War Machine and Iron Man. Search your deck for a tech upgrade and put it into play. Shuffle your deck. Ready Iron Man and War Machine. It's okay. Right, it's okay. 3 costs, that's pretty expensive to search for a tech upgrade and put it and then ready up. It's not bad, but I don't love it. I don't think it's anything too crazy strong. And then you get your normal doubles at the end. All right, so War Machine's extra cards. As 1, an aggression card, 2 cost event. It's a Lions card. Exhaust an Avenger and a guardian character you control. Deal X damage to an enemy where X is the combined attack of those 2 characters. It gains overkill. Again, if you do Avenger Guardian builds, this is kind of worth it. We're going to see, I think, a pattern with all of these, right? Oh, no, that was different. They spread them out throughout the cycle. I forgot. So as 1 is fine. I don't think it's amazing. I've rarely used it. Vigilante Training, 1 cost support. Max 2 per deck, uses 2 training counters. This is just like the protection one. You can get a card back into from your discard pile back into your deck. Not bad, right? It's Alter Ego, which does stink, but it's not a terrible card. Somewhat can be somewhat useful at times. And I guess I should also mention the protection one was Alter Ego too. I don't know if I mentioned that. Like, that's an important note because you can't recur it on your hero side, but whatever. It is an Alter Ego card. So that kind of puts some limitations on it, but it could still be worth it, especially if you're flipping down a ton. All right, Stand Together. I don't think I've ever used. 4 cost event. It's an alliance card. When a friendly character would take any amount of damage from an attack, exhaust an Avenger character and a Guardian character to prevent all that damage. Deal that much damage to the attacking enemy. I've seen people make this argument for Ronin, where Ronin's doing a massive swing to exhaust 2 characters, and you get to prevent all that damage. That it makes sense, right? And maybe, right? Maybe if you can get all those ducks in a row and line that up, I think that's really tough to do. But again, if there's times Ronan has swung for 15 to bounce that right back at him, super strong. But to get that all set up, to get both characters out there, and if you're playing solo, it's even more of a nightmare because you got to put Honorary Guardian or Avenger on. But to get all that out there and then pay 4 as well, like that's a big ask. That's a lot going on. So I don't think I've ever really used this card, to be honest. But if somebody has a decent build or use with it, like let me know. I think that could be interesting. And then finally, Sidearms, a 1-cost upgrade attached to an ally. Ally gets +1 attack and its attacks gain range. It's fine, right? It could be fine to get the range so you're not getting retaliated. But I don't pay super close attention to it. And the very last card is another copy of 2 Against the World. All right, now the moment you've been waiting for, the GOAT, because she does have the greatest deck of all time. She is the greatest hero of all time, as we all know. She comes in aggression, which makes sense. So it's first we have Thor, 3-cost ally, 1 Thor, 3 attack with 2 consequential damage, 3 life, comes in with toughness. When Thor attacks a minion engaged with a player, spend an energy resource, resolve this attack against each minion engaged with that player. It's a pretty cool way of like knocking out a bunch of minions if you're dealing with that. Can be super useful. I don't use it a ton, but if you're going against a minion heavy deck, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, 3 attack against several minions is pretty strong in general. Throg is a fantastic card. 2-cost ally, 1 thwart, 2 attack, 2 life. After Throg enters play, give him a tough status if you're engaged with a minion. Again, most aggression type builds, you're going to be engaged with a minion, so he gets a tough status. Helps him being a blocker the first round, attack next round with 2, and then be a blocker at the very end, which is useful. Angela, we've talked about to help get those minions in there. Can be useful, but if you make a big swing and a whiff with her of searching the top 10 cards, that kind of stinks and is not as exciting. All right, Hall of Heroes is a 2-cost support. After you defeat a minion, place 1 glory counter here. Alter Ego action, exhaust Hall of Heroes, remove 3 glory counters from it, draw 3 cards. If you're doing kind of a flipping build, there's some really interesting stuff you can do with this. Can be worth it. Combat Training, +1 attack, fine card. That's all good. Quick Strike's okay. 2-cost event, deal damage to an enemy equal to your attack. It's fine, right? It's a fine card. It's not great though. I feel like 2 for 4 would be the best build, but you gotta be swinging 4, which is possible, but that's a bit rough to get to sometimes. So Quick Strike's okay, but I don't love it. Smash the Problem, I don't really care for. It's a 1-cost event. You exhaust your hero, remove threat from a scheme equal to your hero's attack. Again, most of the time in aggression, you want to be attacking, not really thwarting. And I get what it's trying to do because you are building out your attack, so it's letting you scheme. I think it's fine, but I don't know. I've never really liked this card that much. The best defense basically is the same exact thing. It's a 0-cost event, and instead of using your defense, you use your attack to defend. Same idea. I haven't really used it a ton. I don't love it, to be completely honest. Audacity, we've talked a bit about. It's a fine card. Power of Aggression, fine card. And then Bifrost, 1-cost support. You can only do if you're an Asgard trait. Exhaust Bifrost, search your deck for an Asgard ally, put it paying its cost, or play it, paying its cost, to get certain allies in that you need that are Asgard traded. This is pretty nice that you need to get them out pretty fast. Can be useful. Or if you're trying to constantly get allies out there, can be useful, assuming they're still in your deck. It's not an amazing card, but it has its place and can be useful. This card's fantastic, though. Godlike Stamina, 0-cost event. You can only do if you're an Asgard trait. Heal 2 damage from your identity, and you may discard a status card from your identity. This fixes a lot of issues with Thor and helps out Valkyrie as well. Being able to heal is huge, but generally speaking, with aggression-type builds, stunning your identity is very detrimental. It hurts your identity a lot. And now to get a workaround for that is super useful. I really like this card. I generally put at least 2 of these in all Asgard type builds. And then we get our normal doubles, which are fine. And then it goes back to Thor. All right, the other card she came with, one of them is Problem Solvers, which is a fantastic card, actually. It's a 4-cost event, Alliance card. Exhaust an Avengers character and a Guardians character. Remove X threat from each scheme where X is equal to the combined thwart of those characters. We've used this a lot on, what was it? Venom Goblin, because you can pair this up with Overwatch and can make it really strong, especially if you build out. This is one of the few Alliance cards I really like, and I think it has a decent place, but can be a strong card. It's not always the right move, but it can be pretty good. Leadership Training is again one of those cards that gets now a leadership card back from your discard pile back into your deck. Not a bad card, can be useful, can be strong. Anticipation, when you engage a minion, discard this card, ready your hero. It's a 1-cost upgrade on protection. I don't know. Generally speaking, in protection, I'm not trying to go against many minions. I would rather have an aggression type deck. So I guess if you're forcing yourself to be in protection, it's not terrible, but it's not something I do a lot. And I really don't like cards that you like discard the card to do the thing. I don't know. I don't love it. It's not terrible, but I don't love it. Cosmic Alliance, an Alliance card, 3-cost event. Choose an Avenger character and a Guardian character. Ready both those up for a 3-cost event. No, generally I don't use this card. All right, last but not least is Vision. Now, Vision came in with protection and some interesting cards. First being Jocasta, 3-cost ally, 2 thwart with 2 consequential damage on that, 1 attack, 3 life. This again, when Jocasta enters play, choose a defense event in your discard pile attached to her face down. This is a lot like Black Panther. I like cards like this. I think this is really useful. Jocasta, if I'm playing an event-heavy deck, gets used a fair amount to be able to get those event cards. I like it a lot. Protector is a 4-cost ally, 1 thwart, 3 attack with 2 consequential damage, 3 life. When Protector would take any amount of damage, spend a science resource and reduce that amount by 1. I don't know. Like, it's fine if you're thwarting and you don't want Protector to take any damage, okay? If you want to do an extra attack without taking consequential, like, okay, like this all can be fine, but I don't find it super useful. If you have ways to constantly heal up Protector and maybe give Protector a bit more life, this is more useful. I don't know, but I don't love the card in general. I think it's fine, but I've rarely used it. Victor, I use a lot. So it's 2-cost ally, 0/0/4. But you reduce the amount of damage Victor takes from each attack by 1. Absolutely huge, especially against minions that are only swinging for 1. I just block with Victor, they never do damage to Victor. It's kind of huge. And even if they're doing 2, right, to basically reduce it down to 1, and then he survives for 4 rounds, really strong card, helps me buy more time in protection. So definitely like this card a fair amount. Flow Like Water is an amazing card. I think this is the first time we've seen it, because this is one of my favorite cards for protection. It's a 2-cost upgrade, max 1 per player under player's control. After you play a defense event, deal 1 damage to the attacking enemy. It's not an attack, so that it gets around all those attacking cards, stun, all that fun stuff. And your defense events, to be able to turn them into attacking cards, is really strong. You pair this up with things like that would give you Retaliate, or let you deal damage back, like Electrostatic Armor or something like that. Flow Like Water just increases so much more with attacking. Like, it's such a good card. It's such a strong card. So I highly recommend this card and this type of build. Flow Like Water with Captain America is fantastic. Highly recommend. Indomitable, 1-cost upgrade. After your hero defends, discard Indomitable. Ready your hero. I'm pretty sure we've covered this. It's fine. Not the biggest fan of that type of card. Defiance, 0-cost event. When a boost card on an enemy attacking you would be turned face up, discard instead. Not that bad now, right? Because there's some interesting boost cards that are coming out there that can either deal a lot of damage or mess with you in different ways or whatever, right? Being able to basically cancel out that card can be super useful. So there is a place in the deck for that card, but it's not like amazing. Sidestep, I'm pretty sure we've covered already. 1-cost event, when you would take any mad damage, prevent 3 of that damage. If you pay for this card using energy resource, deal 1 damage to an enemy. Pretty strong card. Flow Like Water works really well because it's a defense card, so definitely recommend for the Flow Like Water build. Get Behind Me is a 1-cost event. Hero interrupt when a treachery card is revealed from the encounter deck. Cancel its 1 revealed effects. The villain attacks you instead. If it wasn't for that next sentence, this card would be amazing. Now, if they're a really weak villain overall, and their attack isn't that high, it's not bad, especially if like the treachery is really bad. So you gotta pick and choose. There are some villains out there that focus so much on scheming that you don't want more scheming against you, or you really don't want shadows, but they only swing for 1, so what's another attack? I found a little bit more use of this card because some of the 1 reveal treachery cards are getting pretty rough out there, and they're not just as simple as like the villain attacks you. So I don't mind sometimes taking the hit in exchange for like not getting shadows out there, right? All right, Preservation we've talked a bit about. It's a fine card. Machine Man's really interesting. So it's a 2-cost 1/1/3 card. When Machine Man attacks or thwarts, spend up to 3 resources of any type. Machine Man gets +1 thwart, +1 attack for each resource spent this way. Now, he makes sense in Vision's deck. He makes a lot of sense in Hulk's deck. I've seen him used a lot with Hulk now because you're going to throw away your cards anyway. Might as well throw them away to build up Machine Man. Makes them pretty useful and makes it throwing away cards a little bit better. Hulk also works really well with Plan B, which will come up much later. But Machine Man is a great card, I think, for Hulk, but I do like Machine Man overall. Avengers Mansion we've covered. It's a good card. Reboot is really strong. 1-cost event. Ready a friendly android character and heal 1 damage from it. People use this a lot with Vivian in the Vivian Vision build, which makes a lot of sense, but using it for Machine Man as well as the other Android card is super useful, but we do need more Android cards because that would be really, really nice at this point. He also comes with his usual doubles, which are fine. Assault Training, it's now the aggression version. 1-cost support, max 2 per deck, uses 2 training counters, gets a red aggression event in your discard pile back into your deck. This is actually pretty interesting, and I like this stuff. I've been using stuff like this more with like what's her face, Gamora, right? Where I'm wanting to get more aggression attack cards out there, or if you're like really planning out your dive bombs or whatever, stuff like this is actually pretty interesting and useful. Again, it has to be an alter ego, which makes it a little rougher, but I've used this card a few times and it's not terrible. Chance Encounter, 0-cost upgrade, attached to a side scheme. When attached side scheme is defeated, search your deck and discard pile for an ally and add it to your hand, shuffle your deck. Again, it could be good for recurring an ally from a discard pile. This is the best way I've used it for something like Nick Fury, right? You know you're going to be able to easily get the last threat off of this side scheme. Gets Nick Fury back into your hand to draw more cards. Can be useful. Would recommend it for something like that. Joining Forces, 4-cost leadership card, alliance card. As a group, the players put a total of 1 Avenger ally and 1 Guardian ally into play from their hands. Depending on how expensive the cards are or how useful they're, it's actually not that bad of a card, especially if you have a double and they have a double. This card makes sense and can work. I've seen it work pretty well. It's not one I use all the time or anything like that, but I do. It does have a place. It does have a place, I think, especially if you're running a deck where these allies are a bit more expensive. Now, generally speaking, Guardian allies, I think the most expensive one is 3, I think. But even then, like getting a 3 and a 4 in for 4 costs, yeah, I think that's worth it, generally speaking. All right, and then one of our last ones is Meditation, a 0-cost event, alter ego action, exhaust your alter ego, play a card from your hand, reducing its cost by 3. For getting allies out there a bit cheaper, really useful. It's actually a card I've been using more and more recently. Kind of actually like this card a decent amount now. All right, so that's everything from the Thanos cycle or cycle 4. If you're interested in previous cycles like the last one we covered, it's right here. Make sure to check it out. It was a pretty fun video to put together. It kind of follows the same exact pattern, so it'll be cool to see what you think about that. And if you made it this far in the video, do me a huge favor. Make sure to hit the like button, hit subscribe. All that stuff really helps out. See you all next time.